in backing away from the idea of himself as a caretaker Prime Minister. Jeremy Corbyn has behaved responsibly, and if he continues to put country first, he will benefit the country and himself. He can now play a decisive role in how Brexit develops. But he should see an election before Brexit is decided for the elephant trap that it is.
Owen Jones has joined us, journalist who took part in protests against the suspension of Parliament at the weekend. But before we talk about that, just respond to Tony Blair. Is he right? Jeremy Corbyn should resist voting for a general election called by Boris Johnson that happens before Brexit's resolved.
I mean, if I were Nigel Farage, I'd put Tony Blair on my payroll, quite frankly. No, he's obviously completely wrong on this. There needs to be a general election which takes place before no deal happens. That's absolutely correct. It would be an absolutely anti-democratic travesty if a no-deal scenario, which the British people never endorsed, which
but why is Tony Blair wrong, in the way you said?
Well, he doesn't want an election to take place until the whole Brexit issue is resolved, and it's fantasy politics to suggest there's a majority in Parliament as things stand for a referendum. That absolutely is not. The idea that this Parliament is fractured and divided and is deadlocked as it could agree on a referendum question, and then a government somehow allow that referendum to take place is for the birds. What needs to happen instead is a general election in which parties such as Labour will go in offering a referendum with Remain on the ballot paper, and the Conservative Party can put forward its no-deal policy, and then the people can actually democratically decide. But of course there needs to be a general election, which is not just, by the way, on the specific details of Brexit. Do you remember Theresa May when she became Prime Minister and spoke so eloquently of the burning injustices which she then poured petrol all over? We need to talk about why this country has ended up in this turmoil, stagnating living standards, the crisis of public services, austerity, and the general election, which is now inevitable, which is definitely going to take place. It could be even announced as soon as this evening. Boris Johnson is now gathering together his MPs and is addressing and the Cabinet later today, that this has to be a defining election on a politics of hope and against the politics of fear and despair. And I think that would be the two directions we would be on offer.
But just to be clear, if there is a snap election called this week by Boris Johnson, and if he goes to the House of Commons, does Labour say, yes, we will be part of that two-thirds majority for a general election?
Only if the general election takes place before the 31st of October. It would be an unbelievable travesty if, during a general election campaign, the British people are deprived of their right to have a say over whether the biggest upheaval since World War II takes place without having a single say on it. Yes to a general election, yes to going back to the people, no to making a fait accompli to a self-inflicted disaster which will hammer working class communities and leave us on our hands and knees crawling back to the European Union and the negotiating table. So let's go back to the people, but give them a proper democratic say.
Yes? No?
Ooh, that was a long sentence.
Yeah. How many commas?
Not enough.
Do we need a general election desperately?
Well,
Yes,
no, we know
do.
that. You've been saying that for ages. This is
Jeremy, John, they will make the decision about how we vote on an election, and they will weigh that up. Do we desperately want one? Yes. Do we want to fall into a trap left to us by the Prime Minister, which might lead to no deal at some point? Then no, we don't. But do we want an election? Yes, we need one, obviously.
All right, let's have a look at some of these protest pictures from the weekend. Thousands of protesters took to the streets. I think we're first showing you pictures in London, but they took place all over the country: Sheffield, Belfast, Truro, all protesting against Boris Johnson's plans to suspend Parliament. And there were thousands of them, but were they as big as you were expecting?
Blimey. We called those protests with 48 hours notice. We've got tens of thousands of people, yes, bigger, tens of thousands of people took to the streets in a very impromptu, spontaneous set of demonstrations in towns and cities across the country. And it was a very straightforward message, which is to stop an assault on the rights and freedoms that people fought for at great cost, whether it be shutting down the Parliament elected by the British people 2 years ago and stopping them from scrutinising the biggest upheaval since the war, and stopping a self-inflicted no-deal disaster, which, as I've said, who's going to suffer from no deal? It's not going to be the banks, it's not going to be the big bosses, it's not going to be the tax dodgers, it's not going to be Nigel Farage and those who bankroll him or the Conservative Party. It will be the ex-mining communities, the ex-steel communities, the ex-industrial communities.
Let's hear from somebody else. Alex, listening to that and looking at the pictures, what did you think?
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Those people who actually were given a voice in the referendum and said we want to leave the EU, who have been denied that voice, who have been shut down, have not been asked to take to the streets and protest. No, they've actually been quite patient and polite and waiting and hoping that government will deliver upon this. And the idea that this is a coup would actually be the situation that someone like Caroline Lucas was proposing, where, albeit only about 100,000 people got to vote on his leadership of the Conservative Party, but a democratically appointed Prime Minister of this country is removed from office and replaced with a load of people who don't even support the majority viewpoint of the public in that referendum.
Is it a coup?
Yes, it is a coup.
How's it a coup?
I don't get that looking at a dictionary.
I mean, if you look up bloodless coup online, you'll see hundreds of thousands of results. What it is the British people 2 years ago, after the referendum, democratically decided who their elected representatives would be. By the way, I didn't like the result. I didn't want a hung parliament with the Tories as the biggest single party, but that's what the British people voted for and decided. Most of the British people voted for parties whose for candidates whose manifestos explicitly ruled out no deal. That was, to coin a phrase, the will of the people.
They also all voted to leave the European Union.
To shut down Parliament.
Hang on,
That's not what
we
all
need to
candidates said they would leave the European Union, and we have not left the European
But why
Union.
haven't? Sorry, this is absurdity.
Can I
Can I correct him there?
briefly.
The reason that we haven't left the European Union is overwhelmingly because Tory Brexiteers have refused to vote for a Theresa May deal, which
The Labour Party, the whole Labour, almost the whole Labour Party.
Just pick up on that. Hang on, Owen. Just pick up on that. It is true that Tory Brexiteers have, to some extent, stopped a Brexit deal going through.
They were some of the people that voted against the withdrawal agreement, but the Labour Party, cynically voted against the withdrawal agreement 3 times, solely for their own political reasons.
Can I ask you a straightforward question? Is there a Tory DUP majority in Parliament? Yes or no will do.
Yes, there is.
Right, so there is a majority supporting your government, and the deal has not got through because people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, Boris Johnson until the third reading, did not support that deal.
Let's go back to your question.
And that's why we have to go back to the European Union.
Is this a coup? Is this a takeover?
So I'm unhappy with the use of the word coup because we are very lucky to live in the UK and places where they really do have coups. It is extremely unpleasant and people die. So no. I think you have to be really careful about your language, particularly in an era of polarisation and nastiness, which I know, Owen, you have suffered from appalling attacks yourself. So I think sort of, measured language is important. But this prorogation is an outrage, actually, and it is not business as usual. And it is exposing the flaws in our unwritten constitution, which we rely on everyone behaving as the constitutional historian Peter Hennessy puts it. It's the good chap theory. If everyone behaves in an honourable way,
there's always a prorogation.
No,
before
Nick,
the
come
Queen's
on, you
speech.
cannot
And we
feel
were-
will
and
over
we-
people's
yes.
It's a practical thing
Exactly.
you do
And
to
we
make
were
sure
already-
the House is ready.
Precisely.
3 or 4
However,
days.
we
This
were
is
already
5 weeks.
The Prime Minister...
No, it's not 5 weeks. We were already in recess until the 7th or 8th of October. Then 3 or 4 days on top of that takes you to the 14th
By
of
the
October.
time
We can
Queen's
argue over the
speech.
technicalities here, but this wasn't necessary. The length of time for suspending Parliament isn't necessary. David Gauke, again, the former Justice Secretary, has implied that he hasn't told the truth, Boris Johnson, over the reasons for that. Do you agree that he hasn't come clean on why he has chosen to suspend Parliament for the length of time and ask
The
for
government's
Queen?
been very clear about the reasons. There's a paucity of government business. We're going to break up anyway at the end of next week for the conference recess for 3 weeks. And we were going to come back on the 8th of October. There's always got to be a few days of prorogation before a Queen's speech. And it's all been
Is this
blended
really a coup, though?
together.
Is Miranda right that that language is not the appropriate language, or is it?
I think you use the language that you want. The Financial Times called it an affront to democracy. So when you have institutions like that, Conservative, saying this is outrageous, you pretty much know it's outrageous. But the point is,
outrageous
the public
is different to a coup, and Boris Johnson is a dictator.
He is proroguing Parliament. He is stopping us sit. MPs want to sit in Parliament.
Can I just challenge you?
Can I just finish one point? Can I just finish one point? Which is that I think where the public are going to end up landing on this is saying our sense of fair play, our sense of democracy, our sense of what we've fought for, as Owen says, is being undermined. Use whatever language you like. It's being seriously undermined.
Where do you go from this? If you said some of the placards, the apocalypse is coming, democracy, not dictatorship, Boris Johnson, the great dictator, where do you go from there?
I have to take the double standards of this programme very, very strongly here. The fact that you are focusing on an entire discussion on some placards, some colourful placards.
You've only got 20 seconds.
We live in a
Say
country
why.
where the front pages of newspapers call people the enemies of the people, traitors and saboteurs. Today it's been revealed there's been a massive surge in Islamophobic attacks because Boris Johnson called Muslim women letterboxes and bank robbers. And this programme, this self-indulgent discussion about some placards when hatred and bigotry...
Well, it's the reason you agreed to come on, I have to say, Owen Jones, and I think, unfortunately, we've run out of
putting
time.
the record straight, and it is absurd. Or your leader saying he's going to don khaki.